Good evening. I'd like to call the September 3rd, 2019 meeting of the Mount Vernon Board of Education to order. Please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Mitchell? Here. Trustee Patterson?
Present.
Trustee Miller?
Here.
Trustee Williams? Trustee McOwen? Trustee Ning?
Present.
Trustee Saunders?
Here.
Trustee Torres?
Present.
Trustee White?
Present.
Quorum is present.
Okay. Are there any communications from the public?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening. The Mount Vernon Board of Education recognizes the critical importance of community discourse and involvement in the education of Mount Vernon's children, and accordingly, members of the public are invited to speak at each regularly scheduled board meeting subject to the terms of board policy. Speakers must register in advance no later than 4 p.m. on the date of the meeting by contacting myself, the district clerk, here in person at 165 North Columbus Avenue, by phone at 914-665-5235, or via email at rmccormick@mtvernoncsd.org. The board welcomes all respectful comment, whether praise or criticism. However, identifying and criticizing a specific student, parent, teacher, administrator, or other Mount Vernon education official or employee is strictly prohibited. Such complaints must be presented and addressed through the proper administrative channels. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak, with up to 1 additional minute to be used for the speaker to summarize and conclude their remarks. If appropriate, board trustees, the superintendent, or his or her designee may respond to the speaker's remarks at the conclusion of the public comment portion of the meeting. Our first speaker this evening is Linda Richard. Richard.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Linda Richard. I'm a proud parent of Mount Vernon School District, and I also work for the Guidance Center of Westchester. And this is why I'm here. I'm here to represent the Guidance Center of Westchester in terms of the services that we provide to the community. I know there's a lot of programs in the community that everyone is not aware of. So to make it simple, if there's a way I could probably come out to your facility, do a presentation, I could do that. What the program I'm trying to advertise, not advertise, but educate people is the health home. Now, the health home is for children and or adults. And if you know someone who has Medicaid and they have to have 2 chronic conditions or a mental health diagnosis or HIV. The reality is Medicaid doesn't want to pay for people going in and out of the hospitals. So if we can help people, if it's putting them in housing, that makes them healthy, we can help them find housing, educate them to let them know when Section 8 is available within Westchester County, actually help them do the application. If it comes to helping them with their diabetes, getting them to the doctor, Medicaid provides transportation to and from appointments. A lot of people don't know that. In terms of resources and referrals within Westchester County, the staff helps individuals with those services. In terms of community integration, sitting in these meetings, knowing what activities are in the community. You know, just because somebody has a mental diagnosis does not mean that they can't sew or they can't sing or they can't write. It's about finding support services and opportunities for them to be involved. So if you know a child, maybe a child who has an IEP and it's behavioral, and you feel that the family can use additional support, we can support the child, that will support the family. If you know an adult who has a mental diagnosis, then maybe, you know, hearing voices is something that, you know, you see maybe they need supported. We can help find support groups. There are programs like the Rise Center in Mount Vernon that helps with that service. Thank you.
Thank you. Have cards?
Yes, I have cards. I have flyers, which was approved by Dr. Hamilton. Yes.
Did you share?
I have them with me. I'll pass it around.
Madam President.
Yes.
Ms. Richards, I'm going to ask you to share your information with Dr. BC and ask Dr. BC to put you on the agenda to speak with the parent liaisons, and they can make sure that our parents who may come to them with specific needs that may be great great referral process for you, she'll be able to make that connection for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Richard, for coming to our meeting this evening.
Our next speaker is Ms. Jarit Anderson Cole. Our next speaker is Mr. Mark Stuckey.
Good afternoon. We starting off the season, the year great with the young lady who just got finished talking about the services. And I hope take her services and help out the young people in the district, because if we can help one child to save that life, it makes a big difference. My question is, well, several questions is, how much is the bond? How much is being spent on the bond? How much was the bond voted on? I don't remember.
The original amount?
Yes.
Was 108 mil.
1.8?
Yes,
108.
108.
108. How much is?
105, I'm sorry.
1085.
Thank you.
Okay. How much is spent from that bond, present to date? Estimate.
Mr. Silver, do you know that off the top of your head?
Do not. So all of the money for the bond is accounted for. It is all already to be spent. There's nothing left. So the work hasn't been done, so we don't know what, I can't tell you what we've actually paid out. But all of the money is encumbered at this time
Okay.
for the entire bond.
The reason why I'm asking this question is when the bond started and you was in the talking phase, we walked the schools and things that were supposed to be taken care of or addressed, like the auditorium and different classrooms and so forth. It seems like more money is being spent than we have. It looks like we're broke. This is my opinion. Something is wrong. Because take, for instance, Thornton School. You have a nice big add-on on the Fifth Avenue side of the building that's just a bump out for the office space. The question winds up being is, that wasn't a part of the original talk. You have grass that's being put in, it looks like grass in front of the building, Thornton. I think that's ridiculous. You have a 5-foot walk path and all this dirt in front of this building. Who's gonna maintain it? It's ridiculous. If you're going to do something, in my opinion, look at it. Back it up. You have people that have to walk down. Those young people coming out of school, they ain't gonna care about that grass. They're gonna step on it, it's gonna be a shamble, and then money's gonna be thrown out the window. So in other words, we're taking the baby and throwing it out with the water. Correct that, put the concrete back down. If you wanna do some kind of landscaping, put potteries or whatever the case may be. We don't need that. It doesn't fit the area. Looking at the building with the parking lot, you got these big posts going up, a lot of money went into a foundation work, you're spending more money than you have. That's the way I see it. You got Pennington School, you got the building that went up, a fabulous building. But how much did that really cost the taxpayers? Because to match the bricks for that building, the old to look like the new, come on, that costs a lot of money. So my question is, for the taxpayers of the city of Mount Vernon, how much is really being spent? Because it doesn't add up. It doesn't. You the board members, you elected by the board, you went out there and you fought to get on this board. Are you doing your job? You got several people up there, a couple of people up there who works for construction companies. Look at the math. It doesn't add up. Something is wrong. I don't want to be next year and you come back, or when Dr. Hamilton leaves, something goes wrong and then all of a sudden the taxpayers get hit with a big bill. There was a man who owns a lot of property here in Mount Vernon. At one time, he wound up putting people out here to fight, to wind up getting rid of those who wasn't doing their job here in the district because the tax was too high. This is the route that I see that's taking place and it's going to take place pretty soon. We're going to get hit with a big tax bill because of this bond. Please, do your homework. You know, I don't like to come out here. If I come out here, I'm addressing a question. I'm asking a question. Are you doing your homework? Not saying yes, 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 yes to everything that goes by. Come on. Pennington looks fabulous. And then I hear there's an administrator who has a shower in their building? Come on, look into it. If I'm wrong, I'm the first one to come back and apologize. I'm man enough to want I'm saying I'm wrong. If this individual has a shower, look into this. Dad, I'm broke. My money's gone. I don't have a cookie jar no more. I can go a different route. You are residents of the city of Mount Vernon. You get up there to be a board member. Please, do your job. We cannot afford to spend more than we have, okay? Because what I saw and what I do see and what was told, Mike, when we did the walkthrough, it doesn't add up, and I still got all that paperwork. I refuse to throw it away because when the hits the fan, I'm going to show the documents. Mark don't throw away nothing. Mark got paperwork from the time he sat on this board. Okay? We did things then. You're doing a great job, but please don't put us in the poorhouse. 70% of the tax roll comes to this building. Everybody's looking at Mount Vernon City Hall. They got to start watching this property right here because you get the biggest bulk of the money right here out of the city. Please, don't look like that big White House on the other side of town.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stuckey.
Madam President, Mr. Stuckey, may I?
Yes.
I'd like to just say something because there was something that you reported that was inaccurate, and I want to make sure that's just not out in the atmosphere without being corrected. All the work that you're seeing going on in the district does not necessarily mean that it is coming from the bond. There are projects that have been part of the Capital Projects Fund that was planned, and there's also money that is part of the energy proficiency contract. So there's work coming that's being done that's coming from various sources in the district. So while there's a lot of construction going on, not all of it is directly related to the bond.
Don, what you just got finished saying on your weekly, monthly reports that you do with the residents of Mount Vernon?
Yes.
Right? Those are the things that you need to bring forth so that people can hear and see what's taking place.
Fair enough.
Not to assume, okay? Because the only thing we're looking at is the bond. And the bond is the only thing everybody looks at. They don't know where all this other money comes from, if the money's coming from. Because what I'm hearing is, you got slowdowns on construction, new contractors and people coming in, so people are hearing this. And the whole thing winds up being is to cover your backs. Now it's time to wind up bringing this information to the table and saying, hey, good evening, good morning, or whatever, this is what's taking place with our school district. Because I'm not seeing a report, in full detail. You get a little piece here, a little bit there. Now it's time to do your weekly or your monthly reports that you do. Let's go from A to Z. This way the people could be on the same page with you.
Miss Stacy Coffey. Miss Anderson Cole. That's it.
That's it? Okay, so the public comment section is concluded. Dr. Hamilton, do you have a report this evening?
I do, Madam President. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to just say today we had our welcome. Happy New Year, everyone. Today we had our superintendent's convocation at Mount Vernon High School. I have been receiving text messages and emails all day long regarding the dynamic speaker, Dr. Chris Emden, who facilitated a very engaging conversation with our district. We will be looking at how we might be able to engage him to help us move the needle to on our progress in the district, and as that relates to the post-2020 planning that we'll begin having discussions on in greater detail. Tonight, I'd like to also bring Dr. Gorman to the podium, and we are going to walk you through our student achievement data presentation. Now, there's some information that was in the lower, what paper
Journal
was that?
News.
Journal News, thank you, Darcy. In the Journal News regarding test scores, and it was a summary of scores, and we're going to take a deeper dive to help inform you about what that data means, where our strengths are, where our opportunities for growth may lie, and what we will be doing collectively to help continue our journey upward. Dr. Gorman?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Evening.
All right, let's do this. I know the board received the data presentation over the weekend. Based off of additional feedback, I continued to update, talk to different departments like school improvement, curriculum instruction, and just wanted to address some of the things circulating around the data. I'll tell you also, I spent some of the weekend looking at really analyzing the data from a website, Syracuse.com. You get any passing rate for any school district in New York is very comprehensive on all exams. So percentages, amount of tests taken, et cetera, et cetera.
Before you go on, I just want to say the copy that was emailed to you, you don't have this one because I revised it based on some of the feedback. Jeff and I revised it based on some of the feedback that you shared. So while the framework is essentially the same, some of your commentary, we added some slides and revised some other slides. So your copy at your desk may not be the most recent one.
Good. And Dr. Ning, I think we could go a little bit deeper in education committees also as we further analyze, because as you dive into data, it takes you different places, and it's a really a deep process. So we could bring more clarity through the education committee as well throughout the year to some of our data strands. Okay, Joel? All right, so this is just a general ELA trend as our continual growth and progress through the district on grades 3 through 8, New York State Education Department. And as we were looking at the data, we were trying to say, how is this relevant? What does it compare to? And I'll show you some of the comparison to neighboring districts and to other city school districts in New York, specifically the Big Five, because I thought we were very comparable to those types of city populations. And so you'll be able to see that data compared to those trends as well. But you do see a steady increase. It looks like like we've talked about, the level of implementation and the potential implementation dips and further work are really essential to our work. We were just talking a little while ago about how important it is to really monitor instruction this year, to be in with our principals and our instructional leaders and teachers in the classroom to make sure that what we're saying we're implementing, we're doing at a high level of fidelity. And the same in mathematics, so this is the end of year 3 in our Math and Visions, and so you could see that implementation dip, that rise, and the continual progress, and it all just depends on how deep we go with the implementation. How do we start differentiating? How do we start assessing individual students? How do we give them what they need based on what their areas of strength go? How do we use formative assessments as we continue our progress? Some of our biggest gains, this was out there. There was a little mistake this morning on a typo, so I did correct this slide, and we did correct it on the keynote. Our biggest gains in ELA were at Columbus, Trapphagen, and our biggest gains in math percentages in grades 3 through 8 were again at Columbus, Parker, Trapphagen, and Grimes. This morning we said that Grimes was a bigger gain in ELA. It was actually mathematics. And I reached out to that building leader today and their team, and I let them know, because we want to make sure they're focusing on the right work, and we didn't want them to think that they're somewhere where they're not. So that correction was made. Also, the highest ELA scores that Dr. Hamilton also recognized today, that 8th grade at the Performing Arts school scored 73% combined proficiency. Those are 3s and 4s. So that's an impressive number for that group. Okay, we haven't talked a lot about AVID since last year, but AVID is moving on this year. We mentioned it today that the high school is using AVID as a bridge towards rigor. And so kids can't be successful in IB classes and AP classes if they don't have the skill set to be successful. When the learning is way above, kids shut down. So we have to make sure we're building their capacity to handle higher level courses and rigorous courses. So I just wanted to share with you a peek into some of our AVID data from last year. That data starts with the average SAT score at the high school and how AVID seniors were outperforming the average SAT scores. GPAs were higher. And last year was our first AVID senior class, and 68% of those students, their parents did not graduate from a college. Yet 87% of our AVID seniors were on, and 87% of our kids were on free and reduced lunch. So these kids actually fit the profile of AVID, meaning first to college in their family, and that's why the additional supports are given. Well, we had 61% apply to four-year college last year. 58% out of those 61% were accepted to a four-year college at the end of the year. 68% of them plan on going to a two- or four-year college, and that doesn't mean that they won't enter a career as well. But we are definitely engaging our kids in the college application process, the taking of SATs, ACT tests, and that culture of college readiness is really important. And I could tell you at another presentation, the numbers are staggering of kids that enter college that really don't graduate from college. So it's not enough to just graduate students from high school, but it's really to prepare them for the next level of work. Columbus School, you noticed in the earlier gains in ELA and mathematics, they were amongst our biggest gainers. That school is really taking off in the AVID world. They have been designated as a showcase school throughout the northeastern United States. So in February, they're actually hosting a day where other schools will come and see them. Specifically, there's an ELA teacher in 6th grade that has really taken that program and implemented to fidelity. She's a model classroom, and it's one of those classes you walk in, you're like, wow. And she is outperforming the entire district, putting that entire AVID package together and using the tenets of leadership, instruction, culture, and systems in place. And she really meets kids where they are. She really resonates with me through Dr. Emden's keynote today when I think about that responsiveness of kids, that respect that kids get when they come into her classroom and how she showcases them and holds them to a real high standard of learning. AVID Excel is also a program for our E&L learners. And AVID was so impressed when they did a couple of site visits this year. They wanted to recognize Mount Vernon and their E&L version of AVID Excel at a national level also. They want to bring other districts to see them. And over the 2 years that it's been in place, over 13 of 21 have increased significantly, and 3 have already tested out of E&L. And so last year we brought AVID to you, board members. This year, if you want to go see AVID in classrooms, we've done it before, we'd be happy to take you, unsolicited. Just tell me when you want to go and we'll just go, because when it's done, it really is worth seeing it in a really great way. And I mentioned the AVID piece. The high school and the STEAM Academy have taken AVID as a bridge to rigor. Last year, when we talked about that, the STEAM Expo, it was a project-based approach which fit perfectly in the AVID curriculum, and that's why we believe that that curriculum actually was implemented at a higher level a little bit earlier than we had expected. So comparing Mount Vernon ELA to other districts around us, and that was a request, I believe, by the board. So I compared our 3 through 8 literacy rates with Yonkers, Port Chester, New Rochelle, and White Plains. And you can see the results there. We are the first bright blue bar. And so we're comparable. I think we hold our own against Yonkers and Port Chester. We're not as strong as New Rochelle and White Plains. I couldn't help but think about socioeconomic status when I was doing that analysis. But we're there. We're in the game, and we are definitely at the comparable levels of these neighboring districts. All right, and so before we get into the math, let's talk about that 7th grade math number, that 8th grade math number of 7%. And so we all saw that, and I wanted to do a deeper dive into that number before I show you the math number. So in 8th grade, apparently 7% of our kids were proficient at the 8th grade level. Well, the 8th grade level, as we started thinking about, is also the level that we offer algebra. Algebra is a Regents tested area and is usually done in 9th grade, but we've started to move algebra for our 8th graders. And so if you look at the first box, you see that the flat-out proficiency rate of 7% was just those kids that took Math 8. And the level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 proficiency. So the level 3 and 4 were 6 and 1%, 7%. And obviously, we need to continue our work with level 1s and level 2s. However, if you look at our 4 middle schools or K-8 schools that offered 8th grade last year and offered algebra, they offered the Regents. So the kids that took the Regents, the algebra Regents, did not take the Math 8 NYSED test, all right? So those kids, and if you look at the left on my passing the Regents, if you pass the Regents, you need a 65. So that's a level 2 in the Regents. So a 2, 3, or 4 is passing for Regents at a high school level. If you look at those 2s, 3s, and 4s of just the algebra kid in the second box, you see the 84, the 22, and the 7, that would be 72%. If you put them in with the Math 8 and you combine the proficiency, the 7%, the 3s and the 4s in the NYSED, and the 2s, 3s, and 4s in the algebra, you put them all together, and we come up with about 29%. 29% is a number that's sort of comparable in the other graphs, and I'll show you that in a minute. Go ahead. So there's, you see that 7? So the 7 over there in the 8th grade 8 math, that is really, if you put it all together, it's a 29% if all those algebra kids just took the NYSED. Of course, we're speculating, but relatively speaking, from a rigorous standpoint, if none of those kids took algebra and they all took the NYSED, we'd probably be in the high 20s there in that 8th grade number. And you could see, the trend is down a little bit in all schools. So I don't think it's only us. But we have made a conscious effort to expose more kids to algebra in 8th grade and continue to do so. So that might be an explanation for that I saw in that 7, because it didn't really make sense on why it would dip so drastically.
Jeff, before you go on, I'd like to spend a little more time on this and give trustees an opportunity to ask questions, because I know this is where there was a lot of conversation and focus on that 8th grade proficiency result that was posted in the newspaper. So I really like to digest this a little more, because the separation of the way students were tested, what was reported was different than the total number of kids in that testing group, because they took 2 different assessments. So can you just back up one slide and elaborate more on that, because you went by it a little fast.
Yep.
So I just processed this data today. This came from Dr. Jack Nandon, who I gave a call, and I said, look, listen, can we do a little bit of a deeper dive in here? And I had thought about that this might be a reason, and then he's like, right on, and he sent me this data this evening. But do you guys have questions regarding what I put up there right now, or comments or thoughts?
No, that makes sense.
Makes a little sense,
Yeah,
right?
it makes a little more sense.
Yeah, it did to me also.
I would like to make a comment that there is maybe a regional or national movement of schools to move more toward what we call the algebra for all, and making sure that all students are proficient in algebra. So to offer algebra in 8th grade rather than having them take the regular test. And more schools are doing it because they see more success there, and it's also more relevant to their high school curriculum, to what they're learning in high school. So I just wanted to point that out, that I had suggested before that we offer 8th grade algebra for all students. We already offering it to all K through 8. So as we move toward K through 8 generalized, I believe that's the way to go. And what we need to do is increase the support, and not assume, oh, these students can't do algebra. They can. We have to assume that they can, and then provide the support required, needed, for them to be successful in the course.
Yeah, and Dr. Ning, as you're well aware of, you take care of that algebra in 8th grade, and then you could go right up to Calculus BC in high school without really stretching your schedule. And when you talk about STEAM learning and IB learning and PVAM learning and integrated arts learning, you're talking about rigor, and that's what is defined by rigor, at least by college boards in this day and age. That Calculus BC is the pinnacle of where you want to be as you get ready for scholarships and looking at that college experience. And the question is, how do you get there? And I think it's systematic, right? So we can't just throw kids into Algebra 8. We got to prepare them, and we have to build them up.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the reasons is algebra is a better predictor of college readiness, than, the other areas. So in 8th grade, algebra in 8th grade. And so this is a movement that started a long time ago that finally has made people realize, we need to do this. New York City offers an Algebra for All program and trained its teachers, to be able to teach its students, algebra early on so that they could implement the Algebra for All in 8th grade.
And everything that I've heard is that course and Algebra 2 are the gatekeepers to get out to college readiness.
We're going to put out a special edition newsletter that just looks very specifically at test data so that this information is in the hands of our parents and community, and that we don't rely exclusively on the journal news to tell our story, because they are telling it from a global perspective and have a helicopter view, and sometimes to our advantage and sometimes it's not. This time it's not. So we will put this kind of data in a very simplistic way and a 1 or 2 pager to send out to our community.
Explanations about it.
Exactly.
So wait, I'm sorry, 1 second. So I just want to be clear, because I've been, as people start asking questions, you start looking at the LOHA data and you start making yourself nuts. So to be clear, we have 295 students in 8th grade that took the New York State math.
The 8th grade test, that's correct.
And then we had 100 and, I'm sorry, I can't see.
157.
That took the regions. And that's not that number is not included in the data. So theoretically, you took almost a third.
Well, if you look, last year we had 500 tested, and now this year it's about 260, or minus the 500 minus the 150, more or less, in the 8th grade.
And then just because I'm not an educator, and I'm assuming other people who listen are not educators, when we're talking about level 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, it's shocking for me that when we hear proficiency being 3 and 4 with the LOHA data and the state data, but now we're saying kids who are level 2 pass the regions.
On the regions, right. That's right, so the regions.
Reality, and
Yes.
I'm glad you wrote it like this, because it makes a lot of sense for people who don't have that educational background. So the reality is 2, 3s, and 4s are technically, my dad used to say D leads to a degree, so I'm not, listen.
Yep.
It worked for me too through college and a few particular classes. But as long as passing is still 2, 3, or 4.
At the high school regions
Okay.
level.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yep. But not the NYSED. That's the 3 and 4 proficiency, right? Yep.
And I would like to add also that one of the strategies is to focus on those twos. All those students who are at level 2. Because level 1, you can assume that level 1, need a lot more help, in order to get to level 3 and 4. But however, the level 2, it suffices to really put together good programs for them. And level 3, in fact, because sometimes you have the low level 3s, the high level 2s. They're the one, as you move them forward and they get to the next level 3, this is really where you can achieve the greatest improvement, in this type of scores.
And what this really speak to also is those ones. There's a lot of movement in the ones, but if you start out at a 0 and you got to get to a 64, that's a lot of movement. So there could be a lot of internal movement within the ones that we don't always publicize that talks of growth, even though they started in such a bad way where they just weren't educated or weren't on pace at an early age.
So Jeff, on the, so MFR, as I understand it, managing for results, is when a teacher is aware of, every student in the class and what level they're at, and they try to help the 2s become 3s and the 1s become 2s, or how does that work?
Exactly. It is a strategic approach to analyzing global data and breaking it down for individual first by school, then by grade, then by teacher, then by student. So once it get to the teacher level and the student level, teachers identify their 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, and they look very specifically at their high 1s, low 2s, the cusp kids, their low 2s, high 3s, low 3s, high 4s, and then there are specific strategies that teachers develop, and it is assessed on a quarterly basis to determine whether or not those strategies that they've identified, including after school supports, enrichment activities if they're at the other end, to make sure that we're moving those cusp youngsters. If from one quarter to the next, we find that those strategies are not working, then the teachers are revamping those strategies. If those strategies are yielding results on the in-district assessments, then those youngsters are moved to the next level and a different set of strategies are employed.
So basically the difference between the schools, since, I mean, I know we have all different parts of town and all different kinds of students, ELLs and whatever, all different kinds of students who learn in different ways, but the difference between the schools that we were showing in terms of who had excelled, do we correlate that to the effectiveness of the MFR initiative at that school?
So when I started the presentation, I talked about fidelity of implementation.
Right.
And so let me tell you a micro and a macro level. So at this level, what Dr. Hamilton, what we do is we call each principal in and say, let me take a look at your data, your school data, your grade data. Let's take a look what's happening here. What is your prediction? What is the treatment? And this is basic action research in its essence.
Right.
At the school level, and this is where we need to go deeper. If we could train, as we train our administrators to have a pre-conference with the teacher comes with her student data, his student data, and then we have a conversation before the observation. Let's identify a group and what your treatment is for that group, whether it's through small group instruction, through
it.
digital learning, through small group, through one-on-one, and then let me focus on giving you feedback so you could improve your craft. And that, if we could get there, we believe that piece will take it to the next level. There's also a lot of research that says if you provide teachers with meaningful feedback 8 times a year, you're going to really see some major jumps. And that's where the work really is.
So how do we do that?
That the work is getting out there. So tomorrow morning, we have orders to get to the schools and teams administratively. The work is, in my opinion, is modeling. So it's a say-do gap. You know, is this what you say and what you really do? Or is it what you say and then there's so much other things to do also? And I think that's
I just
that's
want to
the
make sure
monitoring
that we
process.
have enough resources, because none of us want to be last or just, we want to be the best that we can be. So I just want to make sure we have enough resources and we're allocating enough resources to this work, because I know, you know, when we get kids, if we get the kids in the STEAM high school and only 30% have passed the math test, are we going to have to give them remedial math when they get to STEAM high school? And then what are they doing in the STEAM high? So, you know, those are my questions. I just want to make sure we think about how we provide those resources, because it seems like it should work. I think it sounds like a great plan.
Right, and one of the things I want to point out, just go to the bar chart. One of the things that, the different one, the one that's, I think it's the next one. Nope, back up. One more. All right, that one. So one of the things that we have to pay very close attention to in terms of how transformation works, and this is not about making excuses. The excuses should have been made back when we were at 15 and 13. We don't need to make excuses about where we are now, but offer explanations. Progress, longitudinal progress has to be incremental. If you see huge jumps going from 20% to 50, 60% in 1 year, it is not sustainable, and there's something wrong.
The data's wrong.
And so rather than put that pressure to make those, because that's what happens in Atlanta. That was a perfect example where teachers and principals were so pressured to make those huge jumps, they were doing illegal things to fortify, appeasing the pressure from the public to make those huge gains. And as much as we want to say that this is nothing to brag about, it is a strategic approach to sustainable improvement. if I saw a school if our district jumped from 31 to 70% in 1 year, I would be very suspect. Because the process that we are using is designed very specifically for sustainable results that are not creating this artificial inflation and then deflate later on.
So, as I was,
Hold on,
Yep.
Trustee Munoz Patterson has a question.
sure.
No, I just, one more thing, just when you're talking about sustainable growth, and so there was definitely 1 year where like one of our classes bumped
Rebecca
up
Turner.
like 20%, and that's and any growth chart goes at a incremental level, so it makes sense. And I think ultimately also we also need to be patient when there's a year, if there's a year that we're, let's say, 1 point down or 2 points down or even, because ultimately those, once you get, and I don't know how to, again, and I'm not an educator, but from a mathematical point of view, if I can get those high ones to low twos, well then guess what? That may be a 2, 3 question, 4 question issue.
Or
But
one
to get them,
student.
but to get a low 2 to a low 3, to get that jump, to get that next bump of numbers, it could take a while, and there has to
Absolutely.
be patience with the numbers, and as long as they're on a positive trend, I think that's a great sign.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And also, it's not one equals the other, right? So run into a teacher that's not at the highest level for more than 2 years, and they say the losses are devastating, right? Curriculum gaps may arise, right? You mix the kids up if they're not at a different part each year, and all those formative assessments. So it is a process that has many variables. What is the sports at home? What is the gap in the summer? There's a lot that goes into just one equals another. But you're right, we are on the right path. So I wanted to see, when I was doing this analysis, I'm like, what do we compare to that's comparable? So we looked at the Big Five, and those are the city school districts in New York, and they include Buffalo and New York City. And so I learned a lot about New York City education this weekend as I was looking at data. You can look, it's like hand math. I broke down, I never realized that this city had 8 different school districts, and then a charter district and performing arts district. And the way the data is presented, they start from high and it moves down. And so when I started looking at all of them, I looked at our neighbors, which was in Bronx. And so I used Bronx for this presentation as well, not the entire New York City school district as a Big Five, because it was just too big to grab onto. There were so many variables within there. So for this analysis, I used Buffalo, Bronx, Rochester, Syracuse, Yonkers, Mount Vernon, and Utica. And these were all urban school districts. They enroll 45% of the state's public school students. Most of these districts are experiencing enrollment growth up and down. The percentage of pupils with extraordinary needs in these school districts are, and you could look at those high percentages, 66% of all English language learner pupils are educated in these districts. And the school districts have high rates of student mobility, homelessness, and students living in temporary shelters. 50% of the state's special ed students are educated in these city school districts. And the buildings in these city school districts are older than others in the state, average over 70 years old. And all these school districts utilize buildings built between 1901 and 1920. So this felt familiar, I'm like, all right, now we're talking, apples to apples a little bit. And so what I found when we compared them is that I think we're on the right path. And if you look at the blue in ELA, we're equal or above all of those districts this year. We're not blowing them away, but we are there, and we are competitive, which means we are moving in the right way, comparing our own to our own. And I go back to this slide because when we talk about our resources, we employ additional reading specialists, additional special ed students, additional E&L teachers, parent liaisons, all these additional supports that other districts that are not city school districts, that are not experiencing these type of clientele, they don't have to pay for those things because they have those privileges where they have that it is a privilege to have those kids at that level already, so they don't need those other supports. So that's a lot of times while we're really tight with our budget, because we have all these additional supports that we have to have based on our clientele and our kids. Okay, so I did not go deep into the regions analysis. I figured we would do this because they've just been out. We did see increases in regions exams in math and English, a little dip in some of the sciences, but again, I have to look at the numbers and which kids went to which ways. Are they higher levels of rigor, and that's why they didn't do well, or are they the same? There was a transitional history exam that we did very well on, and that was published in our own internal news story, and those were the new framework global history regents exams. And so what are the implications? And I really went quick here because I can't really tell you much about this analysis, except that you do see some gains in the Algebra 1 Common Core and the Algebra 2. And the English Language Arts. The English Language Arts is actually tied into our APPR with our teachers and our MPPR with our administrators. That is part of their overall rating. So the English regions are a very important component to the teacher success as well. The Common Core Geometry regions, and the Living Environment regions. We have to talk about those kids again that are taking those exams in 8th grade versus high school. And the other high school exams, the science exams, and then the history exams. So what are the implications? The district, we need to continue our move with literacy across the content areas. That is one of our major focuses on professional learning this year. Reading for disciplinary literacy. So what does it mean to read in a math class, a science class, a history class, a CTE class? It means different things when you're reading for meaning, and hopefully those connections are interesting to students and it becomes a more of an engagement issue. That was one of our biggest takeaways today, is how do we engage the kids? Like, school's boring for children if it's not relevant. And I thought that example, I couldn't have done better, but he took out Siri right away and said, you want me to look something up? I'm going on my phone. That's where I'm getting the information. But if you tell me to do something with it and make it relevant to my world, then I'm off to the races. SWD, specially designed instruction with our special education students, and it's just a good practice for teaching and learning, sharing best practices for ELs, emphasis on response to intervention. We have to continue to monitor our interventions for kids and see if they're working. RTI is just another version of MFR. In a lot of ways. The alignment of our district initiatives to school practices, making sure school improvement is linked to CNI, which is linked to DTSDE, which is linked to the SEP plans, and it's all connected is very important. Otherwise, we might be driving in different directions on different roads. So that alignment and this constant communication and talk with not only our principals, but our teachers and our central office is really important to really make sense of the direction that we're going on. One of the biggest things that we're really focusing in on is culturally relevant learning and teaching and the social emotional needs of children, right? So you can't learn if you're not ready. You know, if something's going on at home in a bad way, why in the world am I opening a book and doing math problems or reading things that have no meaning to me when I have issues going on at home? So that social emotional component is very important. There's a lot of mindfulness in schools, a lot of breathing and centering and focusing on what's important, because life is very hectic and challenging for kids in society today. And our new curriculum initiatives, not all of these are new curriculum initiatives, these are current initiatives as well as new ones. The new learning standards, which focus in on 21st century learning and higher level thinking, is in year 2 of its adoption. Grade 1 is adopting their journeys. Balanced literacy, we are looking towards really adopting a balanced literacy curriculum and a TC model of guided reading and leveled readers. We're looking at leveled readers through Learning A to Z, project-based learning in science. That's the whole partnership with discovery and project-based learning that is meeting people, can touch and feel what we're learning is very powerful. The academic power hour, we've heard some really great things this last year, and parents actually are almost on a waiting list for some of the academic power hours on what they can get for their kids and what they want more. The summer school work that Dr. BC and her team has put together has been great, and you heard about that a couple of months ago. In addition to the 7th grade summer program they put up just for kids that were failing in literacy and mathematics this year, so we're trying to be responsive to our data. Our culinary programs, our culture responsive teaching, our AVID program, and like Dr. Hamilton said today, our IB is full steam ahead at Mount Vernon High School, which is really shifting the way they're learning at teaching and learning. We will be back out there regularly, but that's where we are on day 1, September 2019.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So we'll be coming back and crunching more numbers and doing our regular data presentation next month. We generally don't do the data presentation this early in the year because we need an opportunity to go in and digest it and find out what the patterns and trends are. But because this was generating so much conversation, I thought it would be important for us to put some information out there just so that we could combat some of the misinformation that was being circulated.
I just want to comment on what Trustee Miller said about resources, especially for something that works. If you see that the MFR is working and we're training principal to be able to evaluate, assess the teachers' effectiveness in implementing it, we could also do some random type of interviews and from district members or hire consultant to do it, to just go randomly at the school, a number of ways, collect the data, just to make sure that fidelity of implementation you were talking about is there, and to second, also the source of data and the source of, of validation of the program, so.
Yeah, one other thing I'd love to see, and we can take this offline, but I'd love to see the AVID, like how the students who have been using AVID compare in these test scores to the students who are not. Because I've never seen anything like that. I know there's a lot of enthusiasm about it and we're rolling it out, but I've never seen data. So I'd just love to see that. Maybe the next time we present data, we could see that. We probably have a trend. Also the effect of pre-K, right? Like we've got enough. I mean the early literacy initiative. So we've got at least 3 or 4 years of that. So we'd love. I think it would be really instructive and insightful for us to see that, because that's where it seems like we need to put the bulk of our resources.
Pre-K students in comparison to those without. Okay.
Yeah, like the early reading initiative and everything. I mean, we believe it's working.
Okay. And that actually concludes the superintendent's report for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. For the next part of our agenda, we're going to try out our new section, which is board member reports. Now, this is unlike committee reports. That'll follow later, and there will be certain committees that will be requested to give reports. But I just wanted to ask if any trustees have anything that they would like to share, whether it's attendance at a district event or some observations. This is an opportunity. And this part of the agenda has been scheduled for 15 minutes, so
Total.
So if anyone has anything they'd like to share, with their
I have one
respective-
thing.
Go ahead.
So I was able to, fortunately, I'm retired, so I was able to attend the entire convocation this morning. And I do have to say that everyone should go on the district Facebook page and listen to the remarks made by Dr. Chris Emden, because it was so on point, and it resonated with me on a number of levels, on my board work, but also it's my mentoring work and being authentic and meeting kids where they are. And it was just absolutely inspiring. So I just encourage everyone, take the 10 minutes. I don't know how long he spoke for. He kept going. He was like, can I keep going? It's like, but you should just take I mean, and the rest of it was great too, but not to diminish Dr. Hamilton's performance and President Torres's remarks, but really this guy, and get the book. I just started reading it, but get the book, and it's really something that we all should be thinking about as we work on our next 5-year plan.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. Would anyone else like to share a report, an observation, comments, experiences in the district, anything they'd like to highlight?
Well, I don't know if this is the time that you want to talk about, registration and out-of-district registration and,
You can. This is an opportunity
Okay.
for you to share something, whether it's an observation or concern or something you'd like to bring to our attention.
yeah, I don't know if I have my number on a bathroom wall or something. But I've gotten a lot of.
It is on the bathroom wall.
I think it is. But I've gotten a lot of requests from parents and that would like to move their child from one school to the other. And I know the district passed a resolution last year to have students stay in their own school district. And I'd like to discuss that, if that's okay.
Sure.
I know that, we initially did it for the equity in all schools, and we think that and I think that Trustee Williams and I talked about that when that resolution was voted on. We still aren't there quite yet, and I think that we could now open it back up to open enrollment. I think that I'd like to know if all the schools are at their capacity, and if there is room for students to come from another area of Mount Vernon to that school, that they should be allowed to. So I just want to open that up for conversation. I know we don't have that much time, so I'll just keep that short. If any other trustees.
So that would be going, it's only on the issue of, your point is, like, because all the schools aren't where Rebecca, Turner, and Lincoln, I guess those are our showcase, or our, since they're all not those schools, that parents should be able to put their kids in other
Well, if you're
buildings?
saying that we want to keep students in their home district of the area where they live, and if a parent would like to send their child to a school across town, they should have that opportunity, correct?
Yeah, but what's the motivation? I'm just curious. I get it. I totally get it. I'm just wondering.
Like the color of the building, whatever, they may just don't want
Yeah.
their child in that building.
Yeah.
And if there's room in that building, why can't they go to that building?
Well, I thought our whole strategy, though, was to have neighborhood schools, and we thought that was going to build community in those neighborhoods.
Right?
So.
But if they don't want to go there, should they have to?
I don't know. I mean, if all schools, if the same offerings are at every school,
But it's not.
well, that's
think
what,
that,
well,
you know,
that's,
people
so
think
that's
it's
the,
not-
that's the point you're making
People
then.
think it's not the same equity across the board, and people want students, their child to go to schools across town or anything. So, I mean, I just opening that up. I know it's been talked about, and, it's a whole big thing, and I'm getting phone calls and texts, and people are angry, and
So trustee, there are two things. I'm going to actually ask Dr. Gaon and Dr. Smith to come to the microphone and talk a little bit about, where's Dr. Smith? Oh, okay. And talk a little bit about capacity in our process. But there are two options. One is the school choice option, and which is what I think you're actually referring to,
Right,
and
school
the other is
choice.
open enrollment.
Okay.
Open enrollment came back from a 1964 decision where the district received a court order to integrate its schools because they had become segregated
Right.
by the most part, for the most part, by race.
right,
And when we had our discussion, I guess last year and a half ago now,
about last year.
about the open enrollment, those conditions no longer existed. There may be some socioeconomic segregation happening in our district, but we're not divided by race because our district is almost entirely African American and Hispanic. School choice, however, is a different, an animal of a different color, and that's where parents can, for whatever reason, request that the youngster go to another school, generally a school that is on the failing list. Now, none of our schools are on the failing list, so if we are going to have that conversation, we may want to begin to talk about different criteria for that, and then what are the implications for students who elect to go to another school, and what are the priorities? Is the priority about that or neighborhood schools? And administratively, we're fine either way, as long as we have a clear direction from the board in terms of what you would like to see happen. But I'm going to ask Dr. Gaon and Dr. Smith to talk. Dr. Gaon, if you would talk more about the open enrollment process, and then Dr. Smith, if you don't mind, if you will speak about the capacity of our buildings and what that might look like.
Can I jump in? Can we stop the clock while they're talking?
Sure. Go ahead.
And can I just ask, as you're talking, can you, maybe you were going to do this anyway, can you specifically mention the timing? When do you do this? And when are parents notified? And if parents have a problem, when do they come back and talk to you? Just the timeline of how this works.
So I'm just going to speak to the history of open enrollment from the time that I was here, because the district was engaged in the open enrollment process because of prior lawsuit about integration. And open enrollment was meant to integrate certain South Side schools, and they are specifically named, with certain North Side schools, provided that there is room in those schools. The board's belief at the time that they decided to vote on abolishing the open enrollment policy was that the schools were sufficiently integrated that they did not need to have open enrollment, because if you look at the population of the students, it's pretty much similar in most of the schools across the district. What I want to warn, and this might not be the opportunity right now, but I know the question has come up. When you start over-enrolling schools from this side to this side, what you do also, you have to remember, is that you leave no room for your students with disabilities, because the schools on the north side become over-enrolled with students from the south side, thus leaving empty space only in certain buildings that might not be buildings where parents want to enroll their students. So I think if we want to be equitable, there also needs to be space allocated for students with disabilities before we fill up every school with students from other schools.
I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, thank you. Just my 2 cents. Hey, Dr. Smith.
Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Good evening.
I certainly wish you would have raised this question before we went through a whole summer of registration. For the most part, we've registered over 2,000 students this summer. That's both new registration and lease update. In doing so, a lot of the parents have requested other buildings outside of their zone schools. The areas that I see which support students go into their zone schools are threefold. Number one, there seems to be an issue with tardiness and attendance at buildings when students go to school out of their zone. Number two, it seems to be an issue in terms of principals not owning students out of their zone, and they feel that when there's a problem, they shouldn't be responsible for it. It should be the responsible of those principals for which students come from. And lastly, there's also the issue when we enroll students from other zones, we sometimes take up the space or enrollment for students that live right across the street. And that could be a problem. In terms of enrollment right now, we have several buildings that are at capacity. Rebecca Turner, you know the schools. We have Pennington, Lincoln, ironically Graham as well. So we have to, we're capping those schools because of the enrollments in those buildings. Every day since we started registering students during summer enrollment, we've had parents they've been adamant that they want their children to either continue in a building that their child previously went, and they don't want them to go back to their zone school. Certainly, that's a decision the board would have to make, but it does pose the problems that I suggest. So when you have students that can go to any school, you have to track them, you have to see what's available, and there are some concerns. As a product of Mount Vernon, I was bused myself, and I know there's some benefits, so I'm not saying there are not. Oftentimes, parents want their children removed because there's been some serious issues in buildings, and rightfully so. So I encourage the board to consider what would be the criteria in terms of making a decision for students to leave their zone school and go somewhere else.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Dr. BC, would you like to add anything that may help the board at the microphone?
Okay, I just want to add to what Dr. Smith said, and I probably she didn't remember, that we cannot make any changes now because we are working, we have a grant from the state that has to do with integration. And starting this year, it's going to be a criteria of the ESSA plans. So, which means that we have to go into all our schools and make some changes. So I would suggest that we hold off until we get the directive from the state as to how we're going to make those changes. Some schools have too many Hispanics, some schools have too many African Americans, so we have to make the school balance. So depending on what they tell us at the end, because we just finished the last training 2 weeks ago, based on that, we're going to have to really go in and make those changes. So right now, I think we should hold off on that and wait until we get instructions from the New York State Department as to what we need to do for each school. We are ahead. Our school was selected to be part of the pilot plan so that we are ahead of all these criteria that is going to be placed there. So I intend to do a presentation on the whole integration process when we definitely get the go-ahead from the state. If you notice, we are doing things in small groups. We are meeting with parents in small groups. We are meeting with different stakeholders to talk about the integration process, because you cannot go out and have a big meeting and tell the parents that, okay, I'm going to move your child from point A to point B without having a plan to say why we are moving them. Because we're going to offer incentives to them. For example, Cecil Parker, when we got the numbers from the state, they are saying to us that Cecil Parker doesn't have any Latino kids in the building. So that's going to be one of the criteria, and that will be an indictment for them. So do we put a program in Cecil Parker and give them incentive for the kids to go there? We don't know. So we have to have all that work out, because you know how Mount Vernon, the community, will go berserk if we don't have it all worked out. Yes. So I would hold off a little bit until when we make changes, we make them once and for all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to touch on that because I think I spoke to Dr. Hamilton about this. There's one school in Mount Vernon that has the most at-risk students in that building.
Correct.
So it's that one school, and and so I say that's why it's no equity, because it's just one school that has the lion's share of at-risk students. And I don't think those students will ever get out of whatever, they need to be mixed.
Right.
It should be mixed.
So when we go in to make those integration changes, we fix that as well. Because maybe, as I said, take for example, the same school you're talking about. In there, it was stated that we have 2 of our students who are white kids who were cited because they are level 1s or 2s. When we look into that building, there's no white kids in that building. There are 2 Indian and 1 Hispanic. But because of the forms that we voted on, that we have to redo for the integration process, then everything is going to be okay, but that's still moving forward when it comes to the integration piece. So when we get in there to do that, I understand about the special ed, we have to, as clinicians, we have to create an atmosphere where we could move kids to other buildings, but we do one move at the same time so that we don't create a lot of chaos.
But if you move those so-called 2 students, now would we have to bus them? I mean, you know, because we can't do that.
We just have to call the parent in and say, fill out the application form and re-identify them because they are not Hispanic. They are not white.
Right,
They
they're
are
Hispanic.
from Puerto Rico. So they're not really white, and it's because they said they didn't see anything else on the form that we revised to say they are not white.
Okay.
Just to clarify, these grant programs and federal programs are very specific about how you define race. We, the Board of Education, don't define what white means. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we're all one race, the human, I think.
We have a white, we have.
No, I know. You have to fill out all these. I know.
But Trustee Saunders, I just want to piggyback what you're saying because I understand exactly what your point is. There are some specific demographic issues that impact very specific schools that is beyond our control. So there may be some very specific parameters that we have to put in place to try to combat that, to change the tide for certain buildings in our district. But I think we have to marry that with the integration plan. And honestly, I had forgotten that because I know the training was still ongoing. But when we look at the integration plan, that may be the opportunity for us to do so and establish criteria that won't create a floodgate, if you will, where we end up with 1 or 2 schools virtually empty because everybody's trying to get out, but rather providing the incentives so that students from other buildings would be more apt to go to some of those schools, if that makes sense.
I think the other thing that was mentioned to me from a few families was that they asked to switch schools not necessarily based on the educational offerings, but based on after-school programs or morning programs, and that becomes an issue then for working parents, or even non-working parents, I guess, whoever just wants, I don't know. But it becomes an issue because we don't have the same programs offered in the same, in all the buildings. And then the other issue that I got a phone call about is that somebody can't get their child, so they have an older child in an upper level and then they have a pre-K student and they can't get the 2 kids in the same building because all the pre-K spots are already taken. And,
I got that call too.
I did too. I got one of those.
Me too. Me too.
It's the same parents.
And unfortunately, I don't think we have that many pre-K classes.
all the numbers may be in the same bathing stall. Is that what you're saying?
I think you should all change your phone numbers.
Go ahead, Dr. White Wallace.
Okay, we got you too.
Hi, everybody. Hi. So, thank you for bringing up pre-K so we can just make this as public as possible. We are so proud to announce that for the first time in our history, we have filled all 508 spots. So, we have enrolled every student in all of our school buildings with a waiting list in pre-K4, as well as all of our CBO spots. Our pre-K3 spots are entirely full. We have a waiting list of over 70 students for pre-K3 and over 18 students for pre-K4, and people are coming every day. So to the community, we are going to be as diligent as possible in the Universal Pre-K department to fulfill any requests as they come along. We have to let school get started. The rule is 20 days of consecutive absence, and then we as a district can take them out and discharge them, and then as spaces arise or if somebody discharges or moves, we will pull people off the waiting list. We have been aggressive as you guys have requested. A special thank you to Dr. Hamilton and Mr. McCormick and Mr. Thompson for advertising through the newspaper, press releases, Facebook, Instagram, and on our television studio. Our registration was started in the first week of February. So we are so proud that your vision is coming to fruition, but yes, people are beating down the doors, and yes, people people are not happy, and it breaks my heart to say I have to turn a child away, but we are going to work as best as we can to get people in schools as fast as possible.
Thank you.
I have a question. Any way that we can arrange to place those children in some school, some setting, whether it's at the high school or any way that the district can make?
You mean the siblings?
Yeah, no, those 70 on the waiting list and those 18 on the waiting list for those pre-Ks, you know, any way that the district can look into it to see?
I mean, I guess we could really look at, we haven't contemplated that, but I guess we could look at if there are any empty classrooms in the district and rehabbing those classrooms because the programs for pre-K, the classroom space is very, very specific, and it is one of the few spaces that is mandated. So I guess we could look at that. I don't know off the top of my head of any rooms that are open, perhaps at the high school. But we could look at that if that's the direction of the board.
Do we have the
we're
money?
Committed, that's what I'm getting ready to say.
I don't know if we have the money.
We're committed
Where's
to
the money
the
coming
money,
from?
because that's,
Can we get some
how many
grants?
kids are you talking?
So the regulations for
78?
universal
That's for four
pre-K as per the
teachers.
state are 18 students with 2 full-time employees. That's a full-time teacher and a full-time TA. You can do a variance for 20 students in a classroom, but if you do so, you then have to hire another full-time
TA.
person for those 2 students. And in order for us to maximize 18 students in a classroom, we must have a room that is at least 900 square feet with a regulation bathroom for those students, exits, etc.
So I think this is a really important issue for the board to take up when we talk about the next 5 years, because if we really believe that pre-K is so important, then we may have to shift some of our spending to pre-K and maybe to some of the curriculum programs that Dr. Gorman is saying are really working well. I mean, we may have to move things around to ensure that we're able to deliver on the promise, because we all said we believed in that, in pre-K for all, but we also have limits, financial limits. We're already in the middle, not the middle, but we've already embarked on a budget year that's very tight. So, but I think we have to talk, this is exactly why we need to talk about this maybe tonight in our strategy discussion. Like, what do we want to be? Do we want to be able to have every pre-K student who wants to go to pre-K in school? You know, but we have to define what we want, and then, as Dr. Hamlin said, then we tell them what we want, and then we have to make sure we have the money.
But the community does thank you for all of your support, and their only one complaint is, if you have it, let's have it for everybody. So I'm sure we will all work together moving forward to make sure that we can provide. First, our promise to the community was pre-K 4 seats, and I think we need to stay the course with our vision. Pre-K 3 is a different animal. They're very, very little children. They're 2 years old, going into 3 years old. So once we finish our vision with pre-K 4 and we strategize, we can then work on what is our vision for pre-K 3. And I just want to say something, Trustee Saunders, because I also get those phone calls, my 2 cents about people who want to move their children. And Dr. Hamilton and I had a conversation today about people wanting to move their children to other schools. We as a board, we as administrators, we need to be diligent to have the community understand that all of our schools are great. And that the work that we've done, and I used to be the ELA person, there is not a box that arrives at Lincoln that doesn't arrive at Errol Williams. There's not a program that we put at Parker that's not over at Grimes. And we have worked arduously to see this continuum increase across the district. We're not being held up by 2 schools. If you look at our data, it is consistent across our district, and we need to do the positive PR for people to understand that it's just as good on the south side as it is in the north side, and to being committed to their neighbors and to their community, and I feel like that's just so important for us.
I think we have to change the image of that one school.
One question. One question. I'm sorry. I love the rise of the pre-K 3. I love the numbers filling up. What type of communications are we having with the local daycare providers that And what type of effect? Do we have any providers that are coming for employment because of, some type of hit, or are we working with any type of communications?
No. So there's always going to be an interest to partner with the district for universal pre-K, and that happens when we open an RFP for our proposal to add a variety of sites. There is a market for everybody when it comes to early childhood education. And me working here at Mount Vernon, people like me, we need daycare centers. Because I'm here at 7 in the morning and I leave here at 6:30. As a school district, right now, we're not providing those types of hours for working parents. So our daycare centers do have a lot of support for people who need schooling or care until 6 o'clock. 6:30, early drop off at I used to drop my daughter off at 6:45 in the morning so that I could be here at 7 o'clock. Now, as we talk about our 2020 sharpened vision for pre-K, if we want to talk about partnering with more care centers and offering aftercare, that can be a discussion. They are willing to absolutely work with us to provide more seats.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to make this point about the perception that people have, excuse me, that the North schools, work, are performing better or working better than the South school, because historically that's been the case. And then when they see construction taking place, in some places, it's visual, they see it, and no construction is taking place in the South, that perception grows, that, we're doing nothing in this area. And this is where I think most people get mistaken, but still, it is a serious concern, to have, because you cannot go and change people's perception just by, doing PR and so on, but we really have to have conversation, with them. We have to engage them in the process so they understand that, wait a minute, our plan is this, we are in our plan, we are slated to do this for your schools, and we are implementing these programs for your children, and so on. So that conversation needs to happen, within the South schools, with the North schools, and should involve the whole community.
And we need to do a better job of commingling the North and South together. Yeah. I feel like we need to have those discussions together with the parents, and I think it'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
I'd like to say I do agree with Dr. Ning that perception, like in life, is everything, and you don't hear about a bunch of North Side parents trying to get their kids into South Side schools. You don't hear that. There's a reason for that, and if all the schools, now that they're not in a failing position, why is the trend still the same that North Side schools are the target for South Side students to come to or be transferred to? There's more to it than just the fact that the schools are not failing. There's more to it, and perception is everything. And absolutely, when you do see the construction on this building and that building, and so many of these buildings seem to be on the north side, and you see these crumbling buildings on the south side, and nothing seems to be happening, this is what drives parents. It's not just the scoring. It's not just whether this is a failing or passing school. And I agree, Dr. White-Wallace, that the South Side has so much of the South Side really does not seem to have a clue who we even are, what the school board even does. In particular, I had to vote on the South Side, take my mom to vote. They had no clue who anyone on the ballot was.
That's the whole city.
Yeah,
Very low voter population throughout the city.
Always
They know
all
you
over.
because you're over 6 feet.
But we also have to change our image of some schools.
Yes.
And start putting more into them so that the image can be changed and really promoting them out.
Right, but I think also it goes, and I think to some extent there's a next level step that we can take. And I know I was speaking the other day about, and we talked about maybe taking our show on the road and going to all of the schools throughout the year, and letting the parents come to the meetings and see what's going on, and giving them an opportunity on their quote-unquote home turf to say, listen, hey, if you walk down the hallway to the left, you'll see what I'm talking about. And I think it gives a different level of interest on our part in terms of what we're to show that we're buying in and to show that we're, and I think ultimately you're right. I think perception, Wanda, you're right. Perception is everything. And Warren, I think you said that too. Like, it's just a matter of we need to, I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude. I just want to include everybody. But I think it is, I think we have to fight years of perception, and we have to fight years of, overcoming whatever inequities. And we need to move forward.
But I've been saying that for
I was just going to say, we've had the same conversation for 6 years now that I've been on the board.
That
We've had
we
this
needed
exact
to-
same conversation.
Okay, but how about, I have a great idea.
And I feel like we are making great strides. And we started this whole thing with Graham and Williams. And it's like now we're moving on to Pennington 2 years later. And why are people talking about it now? They didn't talk about it 2 years ago. Listen, the one universal truth is all people, rich, poor, black, white, Hispanic, all people are lazy, right? So we have to go, including myself. So it takes a lot of work. No, what I'm saying, it takes a lot of work to proactively put your message out there.
Correct.
And I agree, like to have board meetings a block away from people, right? Because they're not going to come up here. And they're not going to go onto the website, no matter how much we advertise.
But ultimately, I think my point, and I don't mean to make this sound as aggressive as it's going to sound, but I'm all about I'm all about talking about it, but I want to be about it.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
want to make that, like to take that step in whether it's the strategic part of this, meeting to say, listen, this is what we're doing, and put it down on paper, and let's move on it. Because you're right, we have these conversations. We had this conversation last year where we were talking about, let's take the show on the road. And I think having the kids here is a great draw.
Absolutely.
Madam President, might I suggest that you, in your capacity as board president, appoint an ad hoc committee chaired by Melissa Munoz-Patterson and co-chaired with me that will look very specifically at this issue and moving it forward.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So we can create the committee now, and maybe you can schedule a meeting and see if there are other members of the community as well that might want to participate and provide some input, because I think it is critical for us. I know, even regardless of where people are, I mean, we learn that we have to take people where they are, including our students,
to go
right?
to
So we
them.
have to do the same thing for our community, and I think it's critical for us to go out there. I think presence speaks volumes, and the fact that we can make that effort to go out there, whether it's to the schools on the south side and have occasional meetings there, whether it's once a month, I think that'll hopefully we'll have an impact.
Well,
but we
and
have to make
maybe
that
if
effort.
the parent liaisons can tell us when the schools are having PTA meetings.
Yeah,
we
even
can
better.
come
I've
up
asked
and-
so that we can come. If we can come to the PTA meetings, I think I was discussing it with Trustee Saunders also. We thought it was a great idea that we should be able to come and visit PTA meetings that all the schools are having as board trustees, even as guest speakers or just a special human in the room, so that we can introduce who we are, so that parents who don't know who we are now can know, because you guys are the voice of the parents especially, so you will be our extreme point contact for that. So you can expect to hear from me. I'm going to be reaching out to everybody to ask you to tell me when your PTA meetings are.
And I'm glad, because I've said that last year. I asked the PTA for a schedule. I talked to the PTA president. I never got anything. But it's very important that we go to the community.
Yeah.
And and we do it during the election. We have to do it when it's not election time. We have to get into the community. And it takes 3 or 4 of us, and we could be there. So PTA meetings, anything. I try to attend almost everything that these schools are having, because I am retired and I don't have young children at home.
You're not retired. You're full-time here. You're full-time here.
Madam
So,
President,
but
I'm sorry.
I go, to almost everything.
So I just want to recognize Trustee Williams, because we've reached our 15 minutes that
Okay.
were allocated for this section, but I want to thank everybody for your participation. I think this is really good, and hopefully this will be a springboard for future conversations about our work, our concerns. So Trustee Williams, I give you the floor.
Just one more observation. A few board meetings, we had mentioned the school safety signs.
Yes.
In that process, that outreach to our mayor, or that whole transition, I just want to follow up, because zero has been done,
No, it's a
Or do you
lot of
think
signs
movement?
out there. A lot of signs
With our schools?
for, around the schools, a lot of signs. He painted all of the
Striping.
stripings and everything. He's really trying to,
The
for school
acting mayor?
safety.
He
Yes.
addressed that this morning. He said that he has a lot of no right on red and no, you know, that he's,
Put a lot of signs
we should,
out
we
now.
should drive around and hold him to
I mean, 'cause
that.
I've
Well,
noticed.
did he put something
that
by
weren't-
the STEAM school, like crossing the street by Wallace Avenue? Because from the light on Gramerton Avenue all the way down to the light right, what is that, Lincoln? You know, their cars get up a lot of steam and.
It's called flying.
Yeah, and there's
That's a
students
whole
that cross
other
the street.
thing we
They
have
have to
to-
cross the street in the middle of that street. They should put some
I
lines
think
out
if we
there.
speak
Each
to him,
school
we
needed
might
to
get
leave
even
a
some
sign.
more
I'll
school
ask
crossings
Mr.
going.
Pulicio to do a drive-by and give us a list of, because I haven't seen that one, Trustee
Yeah, that
Saunders. I
one,
haven't
I was,
seen.
you know, when we were running for reelection, a parent came to me right after that student got hit by a car, and, you know, that's a big concern.
But since
can
he's
we
new,
ask-
we might can get
Yeah,
some
Michael
more,
to follow up on that.
Yes.
They just put some stripes out there, you know, or even if you
Madam
could put
President, if you
Yeah.
can indulge.
a police officer there to.
Oh,
Dr.
Dr.
BC.
BC, yes.
Excuse me? Could you use the microphone, please?
I'm sorry, Dr. BC, could you use the microphone, please?
Michael P. to follow up.
Our viewers at home would like to hear you speak.
Yes. Thank you. So what I would like to advise you of is that last week we spent a whole week with the parent liaison doing PDs and also preparing a whole calendar for the of activities for the whole year. We will give them to you at the next board meeting. And we are going to ask board members to come out and host some of those activities that is going to be in the community. So next week, we will definitely present to you with all the activities all
Right.
year. And they will be working along with the PTA presidents. Because last year, they didn't work so closely with them. I mean, they have conversations and all of that, but to get them involved in the whole concept of how we, you know, address our parents, they're going to do that too. That's one of the things we have to improve this year. But we have all that all said and
Right.
done. So we'll give you a copy at the next board meeting.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Dr. BC.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next portion of the board meeting, we're going to move on to committee reports. Trustee McGowan, do you have a policy committee report this week? No? Trustee Munoz Patterson, do you have an audit committee report?
I don't have an official report, but we did receive a number of resumes of individuals that are interested in serving on the committee, and we'll be reviewing those probably by the end of this week.
Okay.
And we should have a full committee hopefully by next week.
Okay, great. Trustee Dr. Ning, do you have an education committee report?
Not yet. In fact, we'll be setting up the dates and times for the fall meetings, and we'll communicate to the board and the community.
Okay, great, thank you. I have a budget committee meeting report. The budget committee met on Friday, August 30th, and we discussed the funding transparency report, which was mentioned at the last meeting, and the funding transparency report. Okay. No, so we discussed the funding transparency report, which was due on Friday, and that was an accumulation of data that listed the cost per pupil per building that was delivered to New York State. That data will also be eventually delivered to the board members as well, and it will be available to the public, right? Let's see. We discussed the transportation, the status of transportation. The budget committee with certain members and members of the administration performed an analysis of the out-of-district routes in order to identify buses that could be sort of collapsed, buses where the routes could be collapsed, and therefore we could reduce costs and capture some savings for the district. That analysis continues, and it will next be applied to a review of in-district routes to see if we can identify additional routes that can be collapsed and generate more savings for the district. That'll be ongoing, and there'll be additional reports going forward. We reviewed the building aid. Currently, there's a delay in building aid because there were certain projects that were not completed within the 18-month time period, but they will be submitted at some time in the future when the projects are completed. There's also some additional aid that's missing because of there's an additional allocation of approximately $700,000 that was due to the district for charter school tuition payments. The district has not received its reimbursement and is working with the state to receive the reimbursement. The reimbursements are delayed because the charter schools did not report that our students from Mount Vernon were attending the charter schools. So that is something that is currently being addressed with the relevant parties at, the commission up in New York State Education Department. Our fund balance, and this is something that I may ask Mr. Silver to just weigh in on. We discussed the status of the district's fund balance. Currently, the fund balance amounts to $5 million. There were monies allocated from the fund balance to cover the increase in transportation expense, which approximately totaled $1.5 million. The $700,000, which we're still waiting for the charter school tuition reimbursement, will also be covered by fund balance until such time as we receive the monies from NYSED. And what else?
Will that money go back to the fund balance?
Yes, that money will go back to the fund balance once we receive the reimbursement. And God bless you.
Thank you.
And I think that's it. And we'll continue our multi-year budget process coming up in the next couple of budget meetings. That will align with our strategic planning conversations, which we're having. I anticipate that there will be a lot of communication and collaboration between the two committees to make sure that as we go forward and figure out or think about what we want to look like in 5 or 10 years, that we can responsibly plan for that and make sure our students' needs are being met and that we are providing all the necessary resources for their success. So that concludes my budget committee report. Our next meeting will be held on Friday, September 13th at 8 a.m. here in the district. Okay. So now,
Can I just report on my committee?
I'm sorry. Did you want? Okay, that's fine. So just so that you know, what we had planned with our new agenda rollout is to have committee reports at every meeting, but we would split them up. So we'd have some committees on one meeting and some on the other. But if you want to give a report, absolutely, you're welcome to do that.
I
Yes, please.
I just had a short meeting. I just had a short meeting with Felicia Gaon and Rachel DePaul. We usually set up our agenda for a special education committee that meets once a month during the school year. And we spoke last year. We spoke last year about going to different buildings because we weren't getting a lot of people to come to some of the meetings. So we did get a lot of people to come here to the district office, but sometimes when we have certain events, we need a bigger arena, so we will have that Rebecca Turner. So we still haven't pinpointed exactly what buildings on what day. The other thing we spoke about were the classes that the classrooms that are in each building for special education, and that seems to be another inequity. So we talked about the classes. Rebecca Turner has 8, Pennington has 6, Williams has 7, Lincoln has 1, Graham has 5, Trapphagen 6, Holmes 3, Hamilton 2, Parker 4, Grimes 5, Columbus 1, and the STEAM has 2 classes. So from what I'm hearing is that the principals do not want special education classes in their buildings. I don't know if that's true or not, but can't we get equity in that as well, Dr. Hamilton?
I think principals not wanting them would probably be a secondary issue.
They don't have room.
Exactly.
Right.
The bigger issue is space. On your numbers, I didn't hear what you said for the number at Pennington.
Pennington has 6.
6.
Because we just got those from
Correct. With the new addition. So the issue really is about space. I think it will resolve itself next year when the additional building is brought online, and we could really look at how to distribute those classrooms evenly across the district. But when you look at the number of sections, part of what drives that is the number of sections that principals need based on first grade, second grade, et cetera. The other issue that we're going to eventually have to face is, as Dr. White Wallace talked about, this robust pre-K population. Those kids are going to roll up into kindergarten and first grade and second grade, and that's going to be something that we have to begin to look at as well. And some of those youngsters will also will identify learning disabilities, and those youngsters will also need seats as special ed students. So it is a dynamic process that we'll have to look at, but I do think space in and of itself can't be the criteria for how special ed classrooms are distributed across the district, but unfortunately, by default, that has become the process.
Columbus has one class, and Lincoln has one. It's a small school. Parker's a small school. It has 4. Williams is a small school that has 7. That's a lot for
That's a lot. That's a lot. I concur.
Just saying.
Yep.
I mean, isn't that what Dr. Gayon was saying earlier, though? If we allow, and this is what I think you were even alluding to, if we allowed everybody to transfer out of the schools that have these stigmas attached to them, then the only place that there are seats are going to be in those buildings.
It's a catch-22.
So we run into it's like, I think ultimately, I think what Dr. White Wallace said was absolutely accurate. I think I think ultimately there's a level of staying the course, but there's also a level of how do we balance staying the course with equity and ensure that everybody is,
Well, I guess.
But your point, Trustee Saunders, is that distribution of classes, it does impact the number of support services that those schools need and their overall ranking in terms of where they fall on the continuum of academic progress, and how that feeds into this cycle of perception about the quality of education at those particular schools. So I do think it is something that we have to look at very systematically, and the prime opportunity is going to be when we have this other school online and we have to redistrict the whole district anyway.
Yeah, and the other buildings that are going to be opening.
Exactly.
So the other thing we spoke about were the ICT versus the consultant model in each building, and how that may impact some of the test scores.
Yes.
So we think that the consultant model is not as good as the ITC model, so integrated co-teaching model. So maybe that's something we can recreate.
Look at?
Yes. I think
I'll mark that as our follow-up item as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's all I have.
Adrian, can I just ask you, I'm just curious, you know way more about this than I do, but is number of special ed classrooms really like the right metric? Because isn't each classroom different, it has different number of kids, different types of disabilities are being serviced? So I just don't know what is the best way to measure the true impact on the school if it's, I have no idea what the right terminology is.
I
But
don't
like there's
either.
4 of certain, one kind of class might be as much of an impact on the school as 7 of a different type of special ed
I
classroom.
kind of thought Trapegan had I always thought Trapegan had more than any of the other ones, but I see Rebecca Turner and Pennington have quite a few myself.
So those are numbers of just the actual physical classroom,
Yes,
but that's not the number of kids.
No, from what
Or
I
the
understand,
number
it's
of
8 in a class, is that correct? No more than 8 students, is that correct?
In certain classes.
But some are less, right?
Certain classes.
And then we
Right.
have 1,500 students
Right.
with disabilities.
And then I know obviously we have, there's some kinds of disabilities that we only have, it's a relatively rare thing, and we can only service it in 1 or
Right.
2 schools. And, I mean, it's always going to be like that. We're never going to have, nor would it be efficient or wise to have identical services in all 13 schools.
No, it's not.
So,
But
and
there's
this
some-
goes to the other discussion, but when we talk about what is equitable, that does not mean that we have identical after-school, identical support staff, identical special ed services in all 13 buildings. That will never happen, and it would be crazy to ever try to make that happen.
No, I don't think we should, but I think that what I'm hearing is that some of the principals don't want special education in their buildings.
Yeah.
Well, that's something for Dr. Hamilton
to look
Exactly.
into,
Yep.
so we can place them. I have a report, but I don't mind putting it on the back grill for next week. But all I would want to say is that all our buildings are ready to receive our staff and our students for this year, for the new September 5th, 2019. So our buildings are ready, they're up and ready, and we're ready to go. And the rest of my report, it'll be old, but I'll put it on the next.
You
which will
can give it
probably-
now if you want.
Oh,
if it's-
okay.
Since it's
I
current.
might as well.
Might as well, it's current, and then you can give us another report next time.
And I don't have my glasses, even though this is hot, big print, I'm still struggling. We have met all the SED requirements. We have a lot of punch list items that's at site work that still needs to be done at Tripagan, Pennington, and Thornton. We are excited to announce that the completion of the Mount Vernon High School fields. They are continuing with additional upgrades, but they are just about finished. So, great. We have completed some more much-needed facelifts to buildings. The Mount Vernon STEAM Academy, Edward Williams got a facelift, Graham's has a facelift, and Mount Vernon High School.
And Parker.
And Parker, okay. And the new science room at Tripagan is completed. And the Mount Vernon STEAM Academy Media Center is ready for students.
Wonderful.
So, and that looks great. You have to go and see. I was on the planning board for that, but they say it's fantastic to look at. And in September, a completed door replacement at Hamilton.
Wonderful.
So I have a short report. That's it.
Thank you,
Thank you.
trustee White. Okay. So this evening, we've been implementing our new agenda format, and I've asked the clerk to break each section into mini consent agendas. I will ask for a motion and a second for each section. I will then open the floor for comments and questions on items in that section. This way, there'll be less of a need to remove items from the consent agenda to obtain clarification and ask questions about it. So the first section we're going to review is the Human Resources section, which is, where is it?
5.
Section 5. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. Is there any discussion on this motion?
Just as a point of clarification, are you asking, we just adopted the agenda. Should we ask, you're asking for clarification
we didn't.
before or after?
No, we didn't adopt the agenda. We just,
Motion to discuss.
oh, we technically voted on it already. Okay.
Motion, second, questions, comments, discussion.
Questions, comments, discussions.
And then all in favor.
Okay. Yes. So I'm sorry. Even I'm getting used to the new agenda.
Yeah, so that's all right, that's all right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So, motion. And then once that puts the whole section
On the floor.
that's when you have your question, discussion.
Okay, you're absolutely right.
And then when that part's done.
Actually did have a question on
Right. So then, now we just voted on it. How do we?
two. Question on 5.
Okay. Okay, so I don't want to rescind it since we voted on it, but does anybody have any comments or questions on the resolution we just voted,
Why can't I open it?
which was human resources?
1A, 1A, and 1B?
5.
5, 1, 2,
Yeah, 5, 1A,
and
1B.
3. And actually, are there any new employees in
Well, I
the
have-
audience tonight?
Trustee
I
Saunders.
did have a question
Okay.
on 5.2. And it was a sort of, well,
How do we-
there was a breakdown of, yeah, I can't, for some reason I can't open it, but there was a breakdown of, can you open it?
Which one? This one?
5.2.
This is,
For some reason you can't open it, right?
this is 5.2. I'm
So
on
5.2, when I, yeah, okay. So when you look
It's-
at 5.2, 1A, 5.2, 1A.
That one?
Yeah,
Document?
5, 2.
yeah. Can you open it?
Yeah, it's opening now.
Oh, my goodness.
Got it.
You're gonna have to open, you're gonna do a pension.
Well, I noticed that some of them have, some of the, this spreadsheet has, some of the spreadsheet has the salary stipend.
Right?
Can you see that? And then on page 5 of 7, wherever that is, page 5 of 7, it doesn't have it.
One more. Keep going. You're on 4.
For 5 of 7, doesn't have the stipend or anything like that. And
Well, the employees listed on.
that's a resignation, that one, but there was one that I saw that didn't have, like, you see how you have, you know, how much they get paid per the stipend? But there was one that didn't have it, and I just,
On 5-7, it does, you're right, it's missing it, but it says per Mount Vernon Federation teacher
yeah, it
contract.
doesn't have the dollar amount.
We agreed when we discussed this new agenda, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? And I don't know, I know we discussed it with Rick, I don't know if we discussed it with the board, but we said that in order to eliminate unnecessary work, we were just going to say per their contract, and we can have, anyone can have the backup and know what their contract is and what their rate of pay is, but to have put all of that in here is just much more labor intensive. So they're paid at their, whatever their going rate is. Yeah,
So-
Denise,
'cause it's
Denise,
The
Denise.
bus monitors.
It's in the other ones, that's why I asked, because I got a call about that.
Madam President, can we acknowledge?
Sure, sure.
Denise Gagnon-Campucci?
Sure.
Excuse me. So, thank you for your question, and I can offer clarification. So in the section where the teacher's stipends and the specific numbers are listed, it's because with those particular items, with those stipends, often as you have more experience in that stipended role, your number changes according to the number of years of experience. So we would have to provide that information to payroll because there's no other way for them to know that, the years of experience associated with that particular activity. With the next group, it says per MVFT contract because there's only one number, and payroll would know that there's only one number, they're all the same for that particular area. So in areas where it's designated with a unique number, it's because that's the only way the payroll would know where a person is in their cycle. With the other group, it's not necessary, it's only one number. They go to that contract, it's that one number.
Okay.
Does that help you, trustee?
Yeah, but I'd like to talk about something in exec.
Okay.
Now, there was also another reason on the second group where it says per MVFT contract. Very often when we're in negotiations, we don't always conclude those negotiations before a current contract expires. So rather than present to the board a number that could, by the time we present it in the packet, in the board docs packet, and the actual vote from the board, that number could have changed. So that's why we make the generic reference to per MVFT contract. So for example, the current amount for teachers might be, and I'm just throwing a number, $45.76 for a particular, $45.76 per hour for a particular item. Well, we might load that into the board docs on a Tuesday for the following Tuesday vote, and if we have had a ratified contract, or if we know a number is going to change in between that Tuesday and the following Tuesday, rather than having to presume that all those numbers that are presented are wrong, we just reference per MVFT contract, and payroll knows to adjust to the new number automatically.
Okay.
Does that help? Okay,
Makes sense.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other comments or questions?
Good.
No? Okay. Sorry, just give me a second.
6, right?
Yeah. He said,
Okay, the
Are
next.
we finished with HR?
Yeah, we're finished
If I
with
can
HR, yeah.
acknowledge our new hirees here this evening, Mrs. Batista. And also Jared Dindy. Welcome aboard.
Yeah.
so cold.
I don't see it, it's not there. Okay, so, oops, sorry, excuse me, give me just 1 second. It's a, yeah. It's not, all right. So it just came to my attention that there was a resolution that was added 15 minutes after the board meeting started. So I don't know if any of you have had a chance to look at it. It's a second resolution. It's,
The seeker resolution under.
yeah, it's under the business office resolutions.
What was that? This one already?
The seeker resolution for the.
6-1?
I only have one.
If you update it.
You need to update
Is it
and refresh.
6-1?
6-2.
6-2.
Yeah, there's a second resolution. So I don't know whether or not anyone had an opportunity to view it.
It's
Right here?
refreshed. No, I did it already.
So
It's still in
before
its
we,
building.
okay, yeah, but we still need a chance to review it, so we can just take a second and look at it. Now this is taking forever.
Which one is it?
6.2.
Declaration of
It
lead
came in
agency.
afterwards.
I already
after we
did
started the
reload,
meeting.
reload again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it showed up
do
this
that?
time.
Yep.
I'm telling you, this is like, you're not getting calls?
Holy.
You don't get calls. It took me I didn't get cards in 2 days. Can't say.
Do I get cards?
Let me tell you about the cards.
Take your time.
We haven't met for our orientation yet.
Okay. That's my fault. I see.
He's gonna have he will have this number, the board clerk's number.
Can you like
Right,
literally
fine.
pull it up so I can read it?
No.
Yeah, could you?
Give it
I
to
probably won't do that, but okay.
people call you.
Otherwise, I gotta get somebody to tell me how to
Yeah,
log on.
got it now.
I can read it to you.
Oh, shit.
Yeah,
It's a long
It's a lot.
resolution. Can we just put it up on the
Yeah, I
screen
would put
so
it up.
that the trustees can see it?
Yeah, because mine is going very slow.
Carlos,
Yes, it's taking forever to load again, to
Okay.
refresh.
how do I, can I broadcast to the screen?
Where is it?
It just disappeared. I'm trying to go back. Yeah, you got it.
Is this the great room? Can I broadcast to the screen? Yeah.
Now I can't pull
Wow.
it
They could by the time this is done.
Just so we get emergency
I
funding.
have to redo my Wi-Fi every time I come here. It never works.
For some
Yeah.
reason they have it.
You gotta reconnect.
I would have had a chance to read it.
It's annoying.
It is. Guess they have a very
No,
strong
it's-
firewall.
Suppose.
Well, what is
It
it?
doesn't approve there.
Can you
Mr.
let-
Silver, you want to, Madam
Yes,
President?
Yes.
explain it.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Can you just explain the resolution?
I had it.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Evening.
I don't think so. We've been struggling to get the Traphagen modules installed, open, and approved by the state. This Resolution 6.2 is a standard CEQA resolution saying that there's no further action needed, that there's no environmental concern by the two modulars being parked in the parking lot for our third grade classes at Traphagen. That's all this says. It says we are the lead agency and that it's a type 2 declaration and nothing further needs to be done.
That's what it said?
May I please have a, thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Silver. May I please have a motion to approve the business office resolutions?
I want to talk about it,
Yeah,
so we're gonna
so we're gonna talk about it.
before we
Mr.
vote.
Silver said that.
So,
Yeah.
so we're gonna talk about it, so we're gonna put it on the floor. So can I have a motion to,
Motion to discuss, right?
second?
Second.
Okay. Now we can talk about it. Comments, questions, let's talk about the resolution.
Right, so about the new 6.2 and two sub-items on 6.1 have to do with Traphagen modulars, and I would like to know what's going on with the air conditioning at Traphagen.
Ms. Felicia?
Air conditioning?
Because the best of my
We have-
recollection,
Yes, we have in our budget.
Yeah.
$225,000.
Yeah.
For the replacement of the chiller. It's a line item in the budget for the replacement of the chiller trap Hagen.
Yeah.
We have two prospective bidders involved. Their prices varied, well, we'll be bidding on it. The prices vary of the estimates that we have dramatically. This has to be bid. It has to be sent to the State Education Department because we cannot do this without state aid. It's too much. We anticipate that it's going to be substantially more than the $225,000, and that doesn't take care of the entire work that really needs to be done to make this work. It will work with the replacement of the chiller, but there's more that needs to be done. That is not a part of this. I'll let Mr. Policio explain that. But this will be done next spring.
my recollection, I mean, maybe somebody else recalls differently. I recall being specifically told this was going to happen this summer. We were told that like 10 months ago. So why didn't it happen this summer, and why are we now being told it's going to happen next spring? That's what I want to know.
So initially, good evening, everybody. Initially, it was planned for this summer in the budget that
Right.
we currently have. When we went out to initially price the job, it came in around, can I mention numbers? Is that okay?
Has the bid closed?
It's not a bid. There is no bid. Okay. So it came in at a certain amount, and I'll discuss it with the board offline, and
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm confused. There was a bid.
it was not a bid.
It was not a bid.
So we went out for a proposal.
Okay.
We got it back from our contracted HVAC person. When we went
On the
to-
state list, you mean?
he's not on the state list.
But
He's
one
a
of our
bidded
district
contractor
approved.
for us.
Right, right.
Another company came in, a bigger company that does Benjamin Turner's air conditioning, and said that's inadequate for the space. So we had E&R do a quick engineering of it, and it was determined because there was such disparity in the two prices that we needed to go out to bid. In the interim, so there's the chiller and then there's a cooling tower. In the interim, we found that the cooling tower is just about at its end of its useful life. So that is going to be put in, so it became a bigger job than we anticipated. So instead of doing something that we couldn't, now we're going to go out to bid, close bid, get aid on it, and move forward. So we couldn't do it in the time frame of this summer when we did these final analysis. And so we put it off until we're in the midst of it right now. We'll go out to bid in like January or February for work early next spring or late spring.
So what was budgeted for that originally, and what is the anticipated cost now?
That was my question. Can I say those numbers? I
Well,
don't
we
know.
can say what's in the budget, not any bid numbers or contractors or anything, but what was in the budget?
So
The public
the line
budget.
item in the budget was 225,000.
Okay.
It is significantly more than that. So that's why we need to go out to bid.
Okay.
So he said that the chiller needed to be replaced, and then they found that the cooling tower needed to be...
We've been repairing this for years and years and years, right? And then we were,
So it used a Freon that is no longer
Right.
legal. It used a different type of Freon, so it had such massive leaks in it. We were able to seal some of the leaks, but then it became an issue to get the Freon. So we can't convert it to a different Freon gas without replacing it. When we did a further analysis on the cooling tower, we found that we should probably replace that right along with it, because the last thing we want to do is go out to bid on a chiller and then the next year tell you guys, hey, the cooling tower's, at the end of its life as well. It just turned into a way bigger project than we anticipated. We thought we could do it with our local guy, and then once we spoke with Ingram and Smith and we spoke with the E&R, we realized that we cannot do it and we need to go out to bid. It's a bigger project. So that was the delay on that unit.
Okay, thank you. I want to make a comment before we vote on this resolution, and I just want to say that I understand there are going to be times when resolutions have to be added on at the last minute. I understand there are times where there's an urgency involved and the board will have to get information at the last minute, be it a resolution or something that has to be acted upon. I recognize that, but that's really not the best way to proceed. And I was not aware that this resolution was added to the agenda, and I review the agenda days before the meeting, so I don't always have an opportunity to go back and see if there's something was added or if there's something new. So I just ask that you be mindful of that going forward, and to the extent that something absolutely has to be added on the day of, I ask that you please let all of the trustees know before the meeting, so that if we need to have an opportunity to take a couple minutes to look at it and just review it so that we don't have to interrupt the meeting to do that, I ask that you do that going forward, because we disrupted the meeting. There's no way that I could vote on a resolution that I didn't read or see. I need time to read it and digest it, and so do all the other trustees. So just be mindful of that. And I think that if the resolutions don't make the designated deadline, then they should just wait for the next meeting. So just have to say that, because it's really
Absolutely.
unacceptable to have to sit here in the middle of a meeting and read a resolution that nobody knew about.
Absolutely. This particular resolution had to do with a certificate of occupancy, so it came very late. We
Still,
apologize.
Right, but I didn't know about it until I'm sitting here, and I'm ready to have the trustees and the board vote on it. So I think at a minimum, we all need to do our due diligence and vote appropriately and be informed when we vote. So just make sure you communicate that to us. Thank you. Okay.
You are.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Okay. May I have a motion to approve the Office of School Improvement resolutions?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Questions? Discussion? Comments? Comments, questions? No?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the resolutions, the agenda for student services?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Questions, comments, any discussion? No?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the acceptance of, there are no minutes, okay. So the next item on our agenda is something new that we are implementing as well this evening, and it's called Roundtable. And we've allocated 20 minutes for this topic, and this particular section of the agenda will change from meeting to meeting. For our first roundtable discussion, we've chosen to discuss the post-2020 vision strategic planning. 2020 is just a couple months away, and we recognize that our district is going to be here past 2020, and we'd like to start a conversation about what the district will look like in 5 years or 10 years. What do we anticipate? What are our expectations? What are the community's expectations? So we're going to spearhead a conversation this evening to begin that. And that's a conversation that will not just end this evening, but it'll continue throughout the year, because this is something that we should be doing on a continual basis. So we will begin that conversation this evening. And I just want to ask the trustees to please direct your remarks to me so that I can recognize you. Since we've allocated 20 minutes, I want to give every trustee an opportunity to speak. And so just please wait to be recognized before you speak just for this session. So, okay, I'll open up the floor.
That's you.
Well, I think in following on the conversation this evening about test scores and programs and all the many things we've introduced to help facilitate student learning in an accelerated fashion and a sustainable fashion, we probably, before we get going, we need to know where we are. And I think seeing the test scores was very helpful, but I think understanding which programs we're going to focus on. Obviously, we understand that we made a commitment to the community that we would have pre-K for all eligible students. So obviously that needs to be something that we need to put into, we need to just agree, is that something we're going to honor that commitment, or do we have to change course? What does that mean in terms of space and all the construction we've already done. And these are kind of the problems you hope to have, that things get oversubscribed, that's great, but we need to talk about, my feeling is we need to talk about what our top few priorities are, kind of like what we did in our retreat, but this is really more now in the context of what President Torres mentioned in terms of the budget, because we can't do everything we want to do. So we need to prioritize what we want to do. And I think there are some good initial thoughts tonight, so I'd love to know what people think about that.
Madam President?
Yes. Trustee White?
On that topic of pre-K, we promised the district 4-year-olders. 3-year-olders is a bonus. So we need to get all 4-year-olders registered and into a pre-K program. Even though we have 18 on the list, that's just one class. So we need one class and 2 teachers, 1 teacher and TA. So on that topic, 3-year-old is a bonus. I would like to see, I know we also promised the community CTE programs, and I know we have increased them. We have culinary arts coming back this year, and for next year, I would, we had talked about maybe HACV or whatever, or the plumbing to go into that with that. So if it means spending some money this year to clean out the rooms that we need for next year, I think that's one of the things that we must do first so that we can jump into that program hopefully next year.
Madam President, could I just say one thing? I just remembered there was a quotable quote from Chris Emden this morning when he was talking about the school district and where we are and what he's talking about in terms of pedagogy and shaking things up and everything. And what he said was, what you've done in Mount Vernon is you've built the necessary infrastructure. Without infrastructure, you can't have anything, right? So we have built, substantially completed, to use a phrase that we use a lot here, our infrastructure work, right? So, and so the next phase is what we should probably be talking about. And that will drive any future, enhancements to infrastructure. But I thought that was a good quotable quote from him and a good framing thing.
President Torres, if I may, since the test scores came out, and I'm the kind of person you can't leave without information, because then I start seeking it out in other places. And if you see the amount of charts and graphs that I tried to create just to kind of get a gauge on where our students are and how they're, and the reality is, I have a very simplistic view because I'm not an educator and I can't tell anybody how, or why the students are, but I can tell you that if it's positive, I made it green. If it's negative, I made it red. It was a very simple, and I'll tell you that there's a heck of a lot more green than there is red. And that was really comforting to me. Because I think sometimes you do get, and we hear a lot, about, well, why aren't you guys more like Bronxville? And so I intentionally, when I did my chart, I left Bronxville in, and I'm like, well, Bronxville, I think like 3rd grade math, they were at 80 something and we're at 30 something. It's not even a fair comparison. And I think that somehow we need to figure out, and part of our strategic plan is how do we retool first the expectations of the community as to where we are and where we're going. And I think some of the goals have to be kind of retooled to be a little more realistic. Because, and to the point of Trustee Saunders and saying, listen, we have certain schools that, whether they are underperforming or not, the fact is the perception is they're underperforming. And how do we reach them where they are? And how do we ensure that they're getting what they need where they are? And so some of the things that just throwing, stuff out there, and one of the things on my list is, obviously graduation rates, because that's always one of the things that you want to see for the high school. And I kind of tiered upper and lower in Mount Vernon High School. And one of the things that kind of came up, and it was probably about midnight last night, so I'm not sure it's particularly good English, but like life-rounded students. Like I think that many of our students, the self-awareness, the self-confidence, the self-reliance, like the ability, like there's things that we can teach. And I think almost, and again, I get a little slap happy towards midnight, so maybe I was just, but I think that we're really at a cusp where we can say we can create something that doesn't exist. And the reality is we're not a behemoth like New York City where we're trying to move that amount of, educators and whatever. But I think that we're really at a cusp where we can say we can create something that doesn't exist anywhere else. And we can really cater to the students that are in our district. And then for the lowers, I was looking at a stronger ensuring the strong foundation, looking at the education, and also, again, pairing it up with these skill sets, and whether we're looking at maybe adding, financial literacy a little bit younger. I don't, again, it kind of came up late last night, but it got really very exciting to think about the fact that we could do something here that no one's ever done. And I truly believe that Superintendent Hamilton if we're doing it, you're going to be the one to you can because I've said things to you before and I know they're a little wacky smacky, and then you're like, wait, let me put it in a term that makes sense and let me bring it down back to earth. And ultimately it does, effectuate that change. So I just think that we need to, and then I think the other thing that we need to focus on, and I think that you had mentioned that changing our state aid status, is that something that we had talked about, that you had said that you went to the state trying to get either our percentages differently?
Yeah, designation.
So, and that may be something that maybe we as a board want to start driving public perception with our elected, elected obviously higher than us, our elected officials, to say, listen, we need this. Because one way or another, and I don't mean to sound overly dramatic, but it's going to be the way it sounds. One way or another, if the county doesn't help us today, they're going to be helping us later down the line when this student graduates and can't find a job and they're on unemployment or something. Or one way or another, you're going to be, the state's going to pay it anyway. So maybe we could figure out a way to bring more revenue and income in, because the reality is we were looking at the numbers according to the state, and we are 35th when you look at percentage of our budget that is used for instructional spending, but we are 15th when you look at the actual number that we spend per student. And if our kids need more, then we need to find that, and we can't do it on the back of the taxpayers.
Right. Agreed. I totally agree with that.
Madam President? I have lots of thoughts about the future, but the one thing I would like to make sure we focus on, and there's different ways to think about it, but I'm going to use the term of leveraging. I think we need to do a much better job of leveraging our resources, and that comes across in several ways. Specifically, I'm talking about finding dollars not on Mount Vernon taxpayers and finding resources that are not in our district. And that includes things like some things we're already doing and can do more of, and some things we haven't really done yet. So it's things like partnering with colleges, right? It's things like restarting the foundation and doing fundraising. It's finding trades, people in the trades and other people to run the CTE programs in a partnership way. It's partnering with nonprofits to run intramural sports, or run a gardening program, or whatever else we might have to be doing. It's doing some things and partnering with other school districts, whether that's leveraging Albany, pressuring Albany, or whether that's just combining resources for certain programs. And these are all things that we are doing, and it's lots of little pieces and little things happening here and there. And I think it merits real focus on, and again, like the grant program is a fantastic example of ways that we leverage a small amount of district money into much, much bigger dollars and bigger programs. But I think we can think more outside the box than we do on a lot of those paths, and really build a partnership. Listen, we're all in on this bond and on this district and on this plan, and we're way in it now, right? But even if we raise taxes a ton, even if we had 100%, even if we had way more state aid from Albany or whatever, there is no end to the things we can do, and there's never going to be enough to compete with certain other factors out there. And we shouldn't expect ourselves to do that. But what we should expect ourselves to do is maximize what we do have, and I don't just mean money. I mean connections and mental power and partnerships. So I feel like it's kind of word salad, but we can be doing a lot more, a lot smarter with, I think, our budget, and I think we can make our budget stretch. And I'm not talking just within the budget committee. I'm thinking holistically across all administration of finding ways to leverage ourselves better.
If I may, really quickly, just to go off that, and that's something that we've discussed in the budget committee a number of times, where we're talking about how can we creatively use the resources we've had, and we've discussed putting, when we were talking about, overcrowding in certain schools, we're talking about putting 6th, 7th, and 8th grade maybe in the STEAM Academy or doing whatever, and ultimately, I think the problem, and I think you're right, if it happens in the budget committee, we're in a silo, and ultimately, we may need BC to come in, or we may need Fletcher to come in. We may need somebody to come in, and that's where I think the strategic committee is going to be so key in kind of, being that connective pull to pull it all together, because that's true. We have so many resources here, and we're so poised, and if we can get creative, I think I don't mean to sound like yay, but we're unstoppable. It's crazy how much is here in this district.
Trustee Torres. So we talked about the pre-K programs and the third to eighth graders, but we also must not forget our high school students, and we promised career technology programs. I know when we get our student board member on, maybe he can canvass the high schools to see exactly what kids want to do, instead of us saying, okay, we're going to have this program or that program, because we've had that in the past. For some reason, we don't have it anymore. I don't know if children have an interest in it, but let's see what the high school students want to do in the future. Maybe that high school trustee could find out from the other students what we can do to get our students to come to the high school and do something there. Also, we talked about night school for adults. So I think we need to also put that in a strategic budget.
So I'd like to say something. I want to share some thoughts, because I think one of the priorities, and I've heard this before when the 2020 vision was first implemented years before I came on the board, and it's something we've had conversations about and continue to. And I think CTE is relevant for our conversation, it's relevant for our district, and it's relevant for our students, because the reality is that our students can be successful, and not all of them have to go to college. Correct. Many of them can have careers in CTE and be just as successful as your, white-collar professional. And for us, I think the focus should be on providing options and trying to identify CTE and other careers that will lead to employment, to gainful employment, will lead to professional engagement. And so I think that continuing with the CTE is critical for us.
Yes,
I mean,
it
not
is.
only does it provide an option, but there's a real need for it. I mean,
Yes.
there's such a critical need for people in the trades. And I don't know if any of you have had experience, but it's the reality. So this could be an opportunity for many of our students that's real. It's not something
Right.
that is just wishful. It's real. It's practical employment. It's practical engagement. So
And
I
it's
think
something
that
you'll never lose. I mean, you'll always keep that in your skills.
it's always necessary. It's always going to be needed.
Electric, plumber,
And they're skills that are also transferable, and not just within a region, but across the country. So, and again, it's about opening doors for our students. So I think if we have the mindset that, yes, we want our students to go to four-year colleges. I know we've made that transition. More of them are applying to four-year colleges now than apply to two. That's great. We're doing wonderful. We're headed in the right trajectory. We still have work to do. We recognize that. But I think it's also being mindful of other options as well.
Right.
So,
Yeah, call a plumber to your house and see how much he makes.
Yeah, just to step in the door.
To step in the
Before he
door.
even looks
You gotta find one first.
right, exactly.
Gotta find one.
That's
Yeah,
the
it's
key.
hard.
Being a doctor
Yeah.
right now, and you don't have the years of debt.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Doctor.
Yeah,
yes.
I would like to go back to at the time that we were, we put together the 2020 vision. I think at the time, we had set two stages, two phases. Phase one is what we are doing right now, the 2020. But we need to go back and revisit what phase two was. What did we say phase two was at the time?
We talked about different phases of the
Yeah.
CTE program, which
Yeah.
we still
Right.
haven't. I mean, I know it costs a lot of money, and all the equipment at the high school is dated, so
Okay.
technology has come and left us, so we need to address those.
Right. It wasn't just that. It was also, I think, capital improvement in terms of more money, because we had estimated the real bond that we needed was over 300 million.
Oh, yeah.
But we could not go and ask for 300 million. We would
Right.
do it in two phases. Like 108 is what we came up with
We
the
had a
plan.
utopia.
Yeah, exactly. So, however, I think given the results that we've had with this bond and with the 2020 vision, it would not be improper to go back, revisit, and go back to the community and say, look, we still need you still need this capital improvement, because again, that's what changes the perception. But that's what drives the students, willing to go to the school, to wake up in a neighborhood and say, I love going to my school. I love being there. It's not just the academics. It's also, that look, knowing that they're going into facilities that are appropriate for learning. And we are far from it, even though we've made tremendous improvement, but we still can improve in that sense, in that area. So it's time to start thinking that way. And of course, the high school, because we focus more on the K through 8. Now, it's time to go, with all the issues that the high school have generated.
Yes.
We've had, I think, the two high school that we've created, the performance arts, looking at 71% of, really high performance for the students is really great. And I was looking at some of the performance of the STEAM Academy also. I think in English they have 100%, and in some of the areas that Dr. Gorman was showing, they really did perform well above perhaps, still below maybe some competing district, but well above perhaps our expectations. And these are really baseline things to grab and to work on as a foundation to build on, for the future. So we have to go back. We should not take anything for granted. Consolidate, solidifies what we already have, but at the same time saying, okay, what else can we do, to continue this improvement? Because the idea is for continuous and uninterrupted, progress,
Right.
improvement of the schools and of the students.
Thank you, Trustee Ning. Trustee Williams, do you have any comments or anything you'd like to add regarding?
No, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done.
Mhm.
I agree on the capital improvements. I agree on the collaborations that need to be done, and I think we spent some time last year talking about these initiatives and these outreaches, and it's just a matter of connecting the dots. So I think this is a really important conversation to strategize. I think we're on track, but just so we have.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all trustees, for your comments and for this conversation. We could possibly stay here for another hour, probably talking about how we actually start to think about how this looks. What are the next steps? What do we do? But we've come to the end of our allocated time, so we will reserve our conversation for the next session.
I think we may need a retreat.
Yes.
Really, wrap this
Yes.
out, put it together, plan, and,
So I just wanted to make a comment about that because we have a retreat scheduled in October, which we had discussed at our last retreat. And we thought, a couple of us had a conversation and thought that we don't need to wait till October to start the conversation. I think we can start the conversation now. It's something that is going to be a continuing part of our monthly meetings. It's not something that is sort of just addressed at one time. We have to have it continuously. It's an organic conversation. It's going to evolve. It's going to develop. We're going to have to, you know, revise it, review it. So, but we wanted to get the conversation going and wanted everyone to start thinking about it so that as we continue to have these conversations, you can come prepared to the table to bring your suggestions, your comments, your questions. And this will also feed into what we do at our retreat. So thank you, everyone, for your comments and conversation this evening. Mr. McCormick, do we need to enter into executive session this evening?
Yes, for the discussion of the employment history of particular persons, people or persons.
Okay.
People or
How
persons?
much time will we need?
Was there difference?
Persons or people. A particular person or persons, there, that's what I meant.
Sounds like you're tired.
How much time will we need?
Dr.
Do we know?
Ham.
45 minutes, perhaps?
Okay. Do I have a motion to go into executive session? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Motion opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. We'll be back in 45 minutes, so approximately 10 to 10?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you coming back?
Yeah, we
There may
have.
be action. Shared in the room, I said that there was a guarantee of 1%. It's 0 to 1%. So I just need to clarify that. The language contemplates 0 to 1. Yes. All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mil gracias. I don't want to rush anybody, but
Yeah, okay, so
I do.
I'm just pulling up the resolution. We have one resolution that we need to approve, and I'm just waiting for it to come up on my screen.
If yours is as slow as ours,
Sorry. It has to.
you'll need a new hairstyle
Yeah.
by the
His
time.
beard's gonna be
Need to
longer.
My
yeah.
beard is gonna be in my shoe.
Okay, let's see. It's not there, I just, oh wait, okay, got it.
There, there.
Oh, I see.
No, I put them on as consent.
my man.
Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda for,
Motion.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Can I have a motion to?
Motion.
Motion.
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Don't move, we're taking one
I need
picture.
one picture.
Approve.
That's just trustees?
Motion carries.
We are now adjourned.
Adjourned.
You didn't tell me to dress for pictures.